Over 400 days have passed since the issue with the Fitzgerald. The silence has been deafening. See, after the issue with the Cole, which we know to be a terrorist attack, there was, within a year, many interviews with independent media speaking to the sailors who were aboard. There were even documentaries made. And there was a great deal of loss of life there. After the issue with the Porter, which was, well, truly an accident. We had audio from it. We've shared it here at the channel. We had flag officers that were speaking about it. We had command officers that were speaking about it. We had all the way down to E4s that were speaking about it with independent media. Fitzgerald, 400 days. 400 days, and the only information we have has come from the Navy itself or out of Article 32 hearings, which has given us a great insight into the events of that night and the complete lack of honesty on behalf of the Navy about what really did happen. This article that we're looking at here talks about Lieutenant Natalie Combs, who has decided to stand up and say no more, and she's going to force them to take her in front of a judge and have that person make the decision. And honestly, I think both of them get exonerated, her and the CO, both, because they're both saying, you know what, you've allowed the high command, who the report itself has said is truly responsible for this, to take their golden parachutes and walk away. And anyone who would have testified contrary to the Navy has been separated from the Navy. I mean, let's also forget the fact that they handed out 36 medals to different sailors who were aboard, but of course their narrative still sets in this make-believe fictitious story about lack of training or fatigue. 400 days have passed, and we haven't heard the truth yet. But what we have heard has really told us what we knew all along, that the Fitzgerald was setting dead in the water. This story from Erie and Woodley about this camera, and you can find it here on USNI, that's the website I'm using today, talks about how they were able to swing a gun camera around to see the flared bow of the ACX crystal slowly filling up their monitor before the collision, which, if you would read the report, you would realize even basic physics would teach you that's not possible. And we'll read, quote, here, then shortly after crossing into a busy shipping lane, merchant ship ACX Crystal popped up on the CIC's commercial ship AIS. Also, there's a funny thing I didn't think of when I first started the video, that, yeah, oh, by the way, they were using the AIS, even though the report states that they were not, dangerously close to the Fitzgerald. Now, real quick, even if this were the case, that the AIS was being used, there's no way the ACX Crystal would have just popped up on an AIS system. If the ACX Crystal was using a Class A SOLAS approved system, which by law it would have had to have been, they would have seen it on their AIS many miles away. But what we showed is that there was a Class B system used for small yachts and tiny fishing boats that was transmitting as if it were the ACX Crystal, and we've showed that in many videos. The container ship was bearing down on the warship, bow pointed toward the middle of the warship. Now, at this point, even 1 minute prior, if that were the case, hallelujah, because what do we know about, at least from the report, from the Fitzgerald? The Fitzgerald was moving at 20 knots. So if the bow is pointed at the middle of the warship 1 minute prior and you're moving 20 knots on a counter course, it's going to fly way behind you. Woodley ordered the camera used to spot targets for the ship's 5-inch gun toward the bearing of the crystal. Fire Controlman Second Class Ashton Cato, who manned the camera, saw the flared bow of the ship fill up his monitor just seconds before the crash. Now, the ridiculousness of this in the story, I'm going to illustrate in something today that I haven't illustrated before. You see, it's not like the crystal was some giant mystery to the command crew, because even here at 1:20, 10 minutes prior to the collision, the watchstander responsible for the immediate support to the officer of the deck, the junior officer of the deck, reported sighting Crystal visually and noted that the Crystal's course would cross Fitzgerald's track. Now, 1:20, that's 10 minutes. They were moving at 20 knots. At 20 knots, that's over 3 miles away. Now, I've used Google Earth to pull up these tracks to show a triangle, to show you what they really want you to believe and the absolute ludicrousness of that statement. Let's see if I can get it up center here. All right. Up here, we have the Fitzgerald. This red dot is down here, this second one, is the collision location. This is, of course, the ACX crystal. Now, what I've done here is create this triangle, the grand total length of 12.29 miles. What this represents is 3 miles. 3 miles is 10 minutes at 20 knots, roughly. Because both these ships were roughly moving about the same speed. The Crystal was moving just under 20 knots. The Fitzgerald was just moving over 20 knots. So we can ballpark this to give you this distance. This distance at 10 minutes prior to collision, here, you're stating that at night, in the middle of a dark ocean, the junior officer of the deck, looking off to his starboard, at near the horizon line, would have seen this cargo vessel and seen it as some kind of a threat at 10 minutes, moving at 20 knots. Also, at 10 minutes prior, the course of the Crystal was different than what its eventual course was, because at that point, it made a turn from near a 90-degree course to a 70-degree course. So the entire calculus would have changed. If it was a threat at 10 minutes, it would have been much less of a threat after the 10-minute mark. It would have been aiming to shoot behind the Fitzgerald. But what do we see? The story says that the Fitzgerald maintained course and speed. If it was a threat here, and it changed course that radically, 20 degrees, it's no longer a threat. So if they ended up colliding, either it wasn't a threat to begin with, or this ship changed course to become one, which we've shown over and over and over again. But the distance here is what I want you to pay attention to. 3 miles here, 3 miles here, means 6 miles here. For those of you who have been to sea at night, 6 miles away is a long way with binoculars. To see something and say, okay, now we're going to try to avoid it, and 10 minutes later not be able to avoid it. Adding to that, this insane story that the captain of the Crystal himself also saw and identified the destroyer by name, and was also attempting to avoid the collision 10 minutes prior. So we had 2 bridge crews that were completely aware of each other. Now, this is the official story from the Navy, that were aware of each other when they were 6 miles away from each other. 6 miles away. And both ships taking pains to attempt to avoid a collision in the middle of this giant ocean ever just so happened to run into each other. That's the official story 400 days later. Now do you see it? The absolute ridiculous story that the only people that are calling this story out reside right here at this itsy bitsy tiny microscopic YouTube channel. And 25,000 subs is small, comparatively speaking. Not one single mainstream media outlet has even bothered to look into this. Not even your big quote-unquote truther channels have bothered to look into this, pick this up, even ask the question. Regardless of the mass mountain of evidence that we have compiled here for a giant lie, a lie that's resulted in the death of 7 sailors and the complete smearing of their reputations in the process. Only one has been buried at Arlington. None of them have gotten their Purple Hearts. And the one that got buried at Arlington had to be specifically requested to do so. But we'll leave it there so I don't go off on a tangent, because it's, as a former serviceman myself, it is a very, very difficult thing to watch. Your fellow servicemen have their reputations destroyed like this, and to watch the low-level folks take the bullet, or to watch the Navy try to affect this. But we'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. Say a prayer for all of the families and all of our servicemen everywhere. Have a great day.